Hi, welcome back to Out of the Ashes, The Fallen Ones. Today we'll be reading Chapter 3, Part 2, and we'll be learning about more of Alexander's story. The day was moving slowly, and he couldn't wait for the darkness to come over the land so that he could go down and see if he could find his family. It was still morning, and his impatience was getting the best of him. Staring out over the fields below the mouth of the cave, he could hear the memory of his older brother lecturing him. "Alex, sit still and be patient. The deer will come out shortly after the rain has stopped. You can't expect the deer to run into the field for food during a thunderstorm." Alexander has always been an impatient dragon. He wished he could hear his brother's voice sitting with him right now. He wished he could hear Chase's love and guidance as he waited to go to search for his parents. He felt so alone. He was all alone for the first time in his life. No one to tell him what to do or what to say. No one to impress or disappoint. There was no one here to tell him how to rescue his mother and father. The sun moved across the sky like it was a snail trying to get to the other side of the field. It was midday, and although the sun was right above him, he would have never known if it weren't for his stomach growling so loudly. But he didn't feel like he was safe to go out in the forest and hunt. What if there were people out there looking for more dragons? If his mother and father couldn't escape from them, how could he get away if they couldn't? What if they tried to capture him too? Alexander didn't want to risk it, but he knew that he had to because he had to get something to eat soon or his stomach would let him know all about it. Normally, he would be out and in the forest with his friends and they would hunt together for their lunch, but today was different. Today was different than any other day. All he could think about was the deer running through the fields behind the mountain, or the rabbits and the squirrels in the forest where they would play in their fort. His stomach was winning the argument that he was having with his mind. Alexander's mind began plotting a safe and secure way for him to get to the fort where he could easily hide and hunt for food. He would quietly dive off the cliff's edge and fall to the grounds below after spending some time scouting the forest below to see if it was safe for him to leave. People's eyes couldn't see the details as far away as the dragon's eyes could, so he felt that he would be able to see them long before they could see him. He scouted the forest for as long as he could, for as long as his stomach would allow him to. The sun was shining bright, and the trees below were blowing in the summer's breeze. Now was as good as time as any. He crawled to the edge of the cliff and looked over the side. He was a little too close than he should have been, and a few rocks shuffled their way off the edge, falling to the trees below. Alexander took a big, deep breath and stepped off the edge of the cliff. Twisting in the wind as he fell to the ground, snout first, his body was a small bullet piercing through the air. He lifted his head at the last second and opened his wings to guide him to the forest floor. He followed his father's instructions and stayed as low to the ground as he could to remain out of the sight from the predators above. But he wasn't sure how he was supposed to secure himself against the predators that were on the ground there with him, if there were any. The only thing he knew how to do well was to hide behind the trees and the brush the best that he could as he hunted for his lunch. It didn't take him long to find the food that he needed. Thankfully, because he thought that the plan was to get back to the cave and continue to hide. However, the more he thought about it, he realized he was hesitant to go back to the cave. He didn't know why. Something in his heart was warning him to stay away from the cave. He fought these feelings for quite some time. He decided to sit in the fort for a while, so that he could think about what he needed to do next. The fort was made of tree branches, rocks, and leaf coverage that were leaned up against the side of an old oak tree at the edge of the field next to the mountain where his parents' cave was. He wasn't too far away from the cave, but he felt safer down here than he would have if he were up there. He didn't know why he knew this was better, he just did. And all of a sudden he was hearing voices coming down the path. He quickly crouched low to the ground. Unaware of whether he was in danger or not, he hid in the darkness of the shadowed trees and was as quiet as he could be. The voice he heard was human. There were 2 men and a woman and 3 small children walking. They were carrying baskets, and from what Alexander could smell, it smelled like warm apples out in the field, but it had a different smell than it used to. It smelled like home, but he knew it was not. He opened his eyes, and he wouldn't allow his longing for his mother to cloud his mind from protecting himself now. He had to stay alert. He had to be vigilant about his surroundings, or he could be easily putting himself in danger. The people kept walking by, and as he watched them carefully, he found himself wanting to get to know them. The mother was delightful, just like his mother was. The father played with the children and raced with them down the path. He couldn't understand how these people could be considered so dangerous to him. But he had to listen to his father's warnings. He was supposed to be on a mission to get back to the cave safely, but his curiosity was getting the best of him. He continued to follow the family down the mountain, and before he knew it, he was at the edge of the woods just outside the town limits. There was a big building, and it smelled like a field with dead, long grass in it. He decided that being in the building surrounded by the tall grass was the best place for him to hide until it got darker, and he could hide up in the loft area until then. Who knows, maybe he will see his family and he could rescue them. He longed to see them again, but he wished that he could know more about this family of people that he was following. The night crept in, and the rain clouds came in slowly, making everything wet and the ground soft. This worked well in Alexander's favor, because the night sky covered in rain clouds made it considerably darker and the shadows longer. The darkness allowed Alexander to creep around town in the shadows to see if he could see or hear anything about his family that was taken from him. He started at the edge of the forest and worked his way around the backs of the buildings all through town. He made it to the docks where the boats were. He decided it would be best that if he got down quietly into the water to search the boats, he would be able to see them better. He could hide his body in the waves coming into the land. There were ships heading out into the seas, and as he swam around the docked ships, he could hear some of the ship's crew talking in the galley inside one of the boats. He decided to swim closer to the boat so that he could hear, and the window was ajar and allowed him to hear what they were saying clearly. They were talking about some of the large creatures that were brought aboard of the ships and that sailed out earlier this morning. He said that the men who had to sail with them were not looking forward to the trip. It was not a good omen to transport such evil creatures from their habitat. The one guy said that the larger of the two had spit fire at them when he was being captured in the cave before they had shot him with a tranquilizer dart to put him asleep. Thankfully, they had already shot the other one with the dart before that one could make any fire. They didn't know how they made fire, but it wasn't safe to travel with them. It was just bad business. Alexander got excited because they were talking about his mother and father. Then he realized that they were talking about his mother and father being on a boat that had sailed away from the town. He was too late to save them. He was too young to fly great distances over the ocean. Then it hit him. They only captured 2 dragons in the cave. That meant that his two brothers were still here, and they were alive, and they could help him. So he set on a journey to look for his brothers. Alexander had grown into a mighty warrior. His stories have been passed down through the ages. From one generation to the next, the tales always come down to the last statement that could be made. We don't know what led him to go along with Drake and his horrible plans to be greater than God. Parents can only end their story time with this warning. You see, kids, evil can sneak in on you, and before you know it, you're on the wrong side of history, just like Alexander. After Alexander left the town where the humans lived and began his search for his brothers. However, he never found them. He had searched everywhere. Chase and Ezekiel were nowhere to be found. Alexander was left to fend for himself. He no longer had anyone there to care for him. All of a sudden, the game with his friends seemed so trivial and childlike. From that moment on, Alexander set out to find his parents on his own. He spent the next several years chasing down any information to find out where his mother and father had been shipped off to. The ship had to have a destination it was sailing to, and he was determined to find out where it went. Hiding in the shadows, he lurked behind whatever he needed to hear all the conversations involving his parents and maybe other dragons who were captured by the same hunters. He had learned a lot about why they were being hunted for everything from their magical properties to the gold-scaled dust and ivory horns for people to mount on their walls. Apparently, his parents were captured by a trade master who had called himself the Breeder. He was after all of the dragons for their eggs, so capturing his parents together was an exceptional event. The Breeder was proud of himself and wanted to get his new dragons back to his castle to begin their breeding. That was good news to Alexander, and that meant that his parents were still alive. He was worried that they had been hunted for their skin or their claws, but since that was not the case, Alexander knew that he had some time to get them out of captivity. Now all he had to do was find out exactly where they were being held so that he could finally make the trip across the seas, and he would have to know where to go. And that frustrated Alexander because he did not know how long that would take. He kept trying to remember how old his mother and father said that he was going to be when he could fly that far. But at that time, he had dismissed her talking and arguing that they were just talking about him growing older and faster, and at bedtime one night before he went to sleep. He didn't want to hear that it was going to take longer. He only wanted to be as old as Ezekiel and Chase were when they were able to fly. They were already big enough to make long-distance trips, and he thought it wasn't fair that he couldn't go with them. These memories were hard for him to remember, not because of the bad memories, but because they were times that he had with his family, times that they had together. All he had to worry about was whether or not he had brought enough sticks to the fort for a project or not, or if he drank enough water before he would have to go home in the evening. He wishes that he could remember when his mother said that he would be old enough to fly that far, but he could not remember. The best that he could recollect was that he knew how old his brothers were when they made their first trip, and that would have to do. Till then, he spent his days strengthening his mind and body, for one day he was going to have to face that trip. And that concludes the reading for today of Out of the Ashes, the Fallen Ones, Chapter 3, Part 2. We hope you're enjoying listening to our story. However, if you would like to read the book for yourself and purchase your own copy of Out of the Ashes, please feel free to go to Amazon and purchase your copy today. Also, go to our YouTube channel and make sure to click subscribe so that you can stay tuned to all the new audio releases. And please be sure to check out our new section, the recipes from Out of the Ashes. Thank you. Have a blessed day.